Alex. I'm the executive director of the Hagerstown Eastern Panhandle Metropolitan Planning Organization. I'm joined here tonight by Elaine Bartleson with the Eastern Panhandle Transit Authority, and we're going to talk about the work we've been doing so far on the Transit Development Plan Update, which is a 5-year plan that EPTA is working on. And tonight, in particular, we're going to be focused on draft service analysis and potential route changes. So the agenda. You hear that, right? I'm not crazy. Okay. Thank you, Ken. So the agenda for this evening, we're going to do introductions to the team. There's not a lot of folks here, so we can go around the room in person and then those who are online. We're going to talk about the goals and objectives for the TDP, what's been drafted so far, the service plan analysis. We're going to talk about the weekday and Saturday service proposals, and then we're going to wrap up with some discussion. Again, we could talk as long and about as much as we need to, and then we'll go over next steps. I do want to thank those of you that are joining online via Teams, and then thank the Jefferson County Commission for allowing us to use this space at no charge. In addition to the public meeting this evening, we are going to be at the Martinsburg Police Station tomorrow night in the George Karos Community Room for those coming from Berkeley County. So next slide, please. Okay. So introductions to the team. Let's see, we've got Elaine and Lewis in the room. If they want to introduce themselves. All right. So we got Elaine and Lewis from EPTA. You've met myself already. And Michaela, would you like to introduce yourself from the
MPO? I'm online. Hi, everybody. Michaela McDonough. I'm the transportation planner with the MPO.
Great. Thank you. And then this project's being funded by the MPO and through the use of our on-call consultants. And so that's the team of Michael Baker and Foursquare. So if you gentlemen would like to introduce yourselves.
Yeah, my name is Jared Toops with Foursquare ITP. I'm the project manager on the consultant side, so the overall day-to-day. My colleague Adam Recchia is not here. He's just our principal in charge, sort of oversight internal to Foursquare. I'll pass to Christopher.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chris Adonis with Michael Baker. I'm here providing quality assurance for this project.
Very good. Thank you. Anybody in the room want to introduce themselves or online? Yeah.
I'm Jenny Brockman. I'm an EPTA board member.
And Kramer with Michael Baker's Charleston office. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Jenny Brockman. We have David Kramer, and then we have Elizabeth Ricketts, City Charlestown council member, as well as an EPTA board member. And then we have Ken Suits. I don't know. Can you hear okay without the mic or?
Not great.
Not great. Okay, so Ken Suits, City of Ranson council member. Yeah. And then that's everybody else. Okay, great. All right. Next slide, please. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Jared.
All right. Thank you, Matt. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the goals and objectives for the TDP. These really kind of set the overall framework of what these recommendations that we propose are trying to achieve. So they provide kind of our overall guidance on what we hope to achieve. We had a series of workshops with stakeholders from both counties earlier this year to look at the goals and objectives that were developed, not earlier this year, excuse me, in the fall. We looked at the goals and objectives from the 2020 TDP and then met with stakeholders to kind of determine which of those were still applicable, which weren't. A lot has happened since 2020, so we wanted to make sure that we weren't just copying and pasting identical without sort of critically assessing. And really the end result of that was pretty minor changes to the goals and the objectives themselves, but we spent a lot of time kind of reordering, even though there's not sort of an explicit prioritization to them, that goal 1 is always the most important. A lot of people kind of interpreted it that way as we had our discussions. So we kept most of the content, but really just critically thought about which is the most important. We should kind of lead with that since people are going to make that assumption. So the first goal is to incorporate the new transit center and administrative facility into future service. This was mentioned in 2020 TDP. I don't think the transit center had even broken ground yet. We're at a very different situation today. Construction is underway with completion, I believe, next spring. And this is really one of the big sort of impetus for the TDP. The recommendations, at the very minimum, the routes need to be realigned to serve this new transit center, which will have a lot more amenities for passenger comfort as well as EPTA operations. So it gives a lot more flexibility for transfers and where drivers start and end their shifts. So it's kind of at the very minimum as we looked at new routes. We have to look at how they all will operate out of that new transit center. So there are 3 objectives under that goal. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty of each objective. Goal number 2 was improving marketing, communication, and technology. What we heard from a lot of our stakeholders after we showed them the existing service and where routes were going, they thought most of the areas currently served were reasonable. They just felt like not enough people know about the service. So there was a lot of questions with Elaine directly about, oh, do y'all have this type of pass? So not just the routes themselves, but the different programs that EPTA offers for residents in the 2-county area. So with the amount of questions we kind of fielded, it seemed like high priority that with a TDP that involves more substantial route changes, this is a good time to really put a renewed emphasis on branding and marketing and communication of this is a big change. Let's capture the attention while we've got it and really kind of improve EPTA's, the general awareness of the service. The third goal was to explore locations for new transit infrastructure. A lot of people are asking, is it possible to get a shelter or a sign at this location? And there are parallel efforts by EPTA right now to install new signage and to look at additional shelters that can be installed. These also feed back into more awareness. If you see a bus shelter, you're like, oh, there's a bus stop there, and captures attention. Goal number 4 was expanding and improving system-wide service efficiency. Overall, we're just, as we look at these recommendations, we look at which routes are more efficient, more productive in terms of the number of riders we see versus, the amount of service put out. So we want to make sure that, okay, are all the high ridership stops getting adequate service? Are there some low ridership stops that maybe cost more to operate versus the number of passengers they're serving? Trying to balance providing adequate coverage to the region while also making sure we're efficient and wise using our resources. Then the final goal was expanding the overall availability of weekend and evening service. That was a big request that we heard from stakeholders as well. Right now, EPTA has different routes that operate on evenings and weekends. So as part of expanding the availability, we also wanted to make it a bit more, a bit of a simpler system of a certain route operates. It's the same route at day as it is at night, and minimal changes between what happens on a weekday versus a weekend. That makes it easier to scale in the future. If more resources are available, it's easier to sort of add on service to existing routes rather than trying to plan new ones for a specific evening or weekend use. So what we did is we kind of took the major recommendation, the themes of the recommendations, if you will, and kind of mapped which of these recommendations meet which of these goals. So there's sort of 5 major themes of here on the left column. We realigned all of the routes to make sure they serve the new transit center. So that obviously meets the goal of supporting the transit center. That's also just a good, that's newsworthy, big event that will capture people's attention. So we also thought that helped with sort of marketing and communication, public awareness, as well as overall new transit infrastructure. We try to simplify routes with more consistent patterns throughout the day. A lot of the existing routes right now will respond to very specific timing and do something different throughout the day. We want to simplify so that people don't get overwhelmed with a lot of variations of the same route. Again, we think that helps improve communications and marketing if it's easier to say this route does this service all day, and also thought where that was opportunities for more efficiencies. Like I stated already, we tried to eliminate a lot of the major differences between weekend, evening, and Saturday service. Again, we think that makes it a system easier to communicate and easier to catch people's attention. They can learn it better, as well as trying to find some efficiencies as we do that, and trying to use some gains from those efficiencies to have more service run later in the day. We wanted to expand coverage to new destinations. Two new areas that we're serving are Spring Mills, north of Martinsburg, and Hedgesville, which is more sort of northwest of Martinsburg. Again, we're kind of lumping that in that communication and marketing goal because now there's service to Spring Mills. Great thing to brag about, kind of get the town talking, right? As well as some of these new destinations will require new transit infrastructure, signs for stops, things like that. And then finally, another major we wanted sort of theme is we want to make sure that as at this new transit facility, the routes were designed in a way that they could really facilitate time transfers. So when we looked at the frequency of one route, we wanted to make sure it matched frequency of other nearby routes so that they could be timed relatively close together to facilitate the customer experience. All right, so there's one more kind of overall section before we get into the routes themselves. I wanted to walk through kind of the major types of data that we look at in the service planning process. There's a lot here, and so I just want to provide kind of a high-level overview of the different types of analyses that we do and combine. There is, I believe, a memo on the HEPMPO webpage that documents fully all of these different analyses and the conclusions we drew from them. So there's really kind of 9 different inputs to service planning. Starting at the left, the first is population and job density. Overall, when it comes to standard fixed route bus service, a bus that travels in the same path all day on a schedule, density of either people or jobs is one of the primary indicators of how much ridership, how successful the route will be. More people in an area, more likely they'll want to use transit, either because there's more destinations or jobs nearby or traffic is, a little tighter. Related to that, we looked at transit propensity. This looks at density, but also looks at a lot of demographic and more detailed economic indicators. So of people who are more likely to use transit. So this will look at things like low-income households or households that may only have one car or no cars, people who are older or younger and can't drive. It also looks at sort of the types of places they're trying to go, not just where are the concentrations of jobs, but where are the concentrations of healthcare and community resources for people who rely on transit for day to day. I have to take it not just to go to work, but to run my errands, maybe outside that traditional work schedule. We looked at travel flows. We used a model called Replica that sort of builds a model of different travel patterns on your standard average weekday based off like cell phone data and credit card transactions. So we use that to kind of get a sense of what are the major travel patterns within the 2-county area. And does our transit network kind of follow those more or less? We have a tool called corridor optimization. This uses an algorithm based off those travel flows to do like very rough sketches of what potential routes could look like. So it kind of just gave us a little bit, it connected a bunch of travel flows through the city of Martinsburg, maybe going one way or the other. We looked at that like, oh, okay, that's a compelling route idea. So then we go in and put more of the detail of which streets it should operate on, which stops it should serve, etc. We looked at the existing performance of routes. Generally, if a route performs really well and strong, we want to make sure, okay, those major connections are maintained, those high ridership stops are still served. Even though we did technically, create new routes, we want to build on existing strengths and successes. We looked at a gaps analysis, which kind of compares all of this data I just mentioned, all of these first 5, to kind of look at, okay, this is the density and the travel flows. Do we have routes that connect those dense areas? Do we have routes that follow those travel flows? So kind of putting the supply on one side and the demand on the other to see if there are any sort of major gaps. We talked to stakeholders as part of that same conversation where we talked about goals and objectives. They gave us some specific ideas of, oh, this facility would be really nice to have bus service, or in this community, we really need to make sure these apartments are served. So we tried to incorporate that stakeholder input the best we could. We had a public survey back in the early fall, I believe, that we got people making specific requests on, I ride this route, it's really nice, or can we extend service into this area? And then finally, like I've said, the new facility in Martinsburg is kind of one of the overarching themes of we need to make sure all these recommendations operationally are designed to operate out of this new facility and any potential efficiency gains. So those are kind of the 9 main sort of inputs to service planning. And so I have here just a few example slides of what those kind of look like. So transit potential, again, is mostly just looking at density. We tend to see that, Martinsburg is going to have some of the densest areas. Ranson and Charlestown are kind of second place. And then density tends to follow, the major arterials in the county, following the interstate or other highways, going as far south as Inwood, going as far north as Spring Mills, to the VA and Hedgesville. This is one of the propensity indices we looked at, transit-oriented populations. So this is one that looks at people who are more likely to rely on transit and need it for all of their potential trips. It tends to follow the same patterns we observed as density of Martinsburg, Ranson, Charlestown are kind of the hot spots, and they kind of radiate out from there. This is an animated GIF we have of all the corridor analysis. And what you can see here as they kind of phase in is they all tend to follow kind of the major highways, arterials, lines of development, which matches expectations. We weren't expecting anything wildly different, but most of the travel is from either Martinsburg and or Charlestown, Ranson, kind of connecting to their peripheral areas. We looked at existing ridership just to see these are really high ridership stops. We really need to maintain service versus maybe there's a few stops that were much lower and there's a nearby stop, 3 blocks away. So we thought, especially in more walkable parts of Martinsburg, we can make that trade-off of having a simpler route, simpler alignment by trying to, serve the high activity stops and make sure maybe the low activity ones are close by to service under the proposal. Almost 40% of existing stops average less than 1 boarding per day, and only 20% of stops have more than 5. These numbers are not, I think, super out of context for a provider in smaller communities compared to other peers, but it does just help sort of guide, okay, what's our highest priority for stops? Can we make a system that's a little more efficient and easier to understand for riders by trying to strategize? And then finally, some public feedback we got. Some major themes were more bus frequency, more operation, improving the consistency of schedules, and expanding weekend service, both to Charlestown and on Sundays. And then some more kind of specific recommendations were adding service to Spring Mills, adding service between Martinsburg and Charlestown, and then some other more requested connections to metro stations, to Virginia and to Maryland. Into some larger, subdivisions. I'll be frank that we treated this as sort of a cost neutral endeavor. So we definitely weren't able to meet all of these wish list items, but I do think our recommendations make a system that's a bit sort of simpler and easier to understand and has a bit more kind of ability to grow in the future as potential resources could be made available. And with that, we can talk on the weekday service proposal. These routes have tentative names right now, just letters of the alphabet, so A through G, I believe. We'll be going out of order because we're starting with the routes we designed specifically in Jefferson County. There are 2 that are kind of exclusively oriented towards Jefferson County, and then I'll go through the Martinsburg routes as well, or the Berkeley County. Okay, Route F. So this is most similar to existing Route 16 in the current EPTA system. And this is connecting Charlestown and Ranson to the VA Medical Center just over the county boundary. We're The approximate span we're proposing would be from around 6:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. The exacts would still be kind of figured out in scheduling, with a service about 7 trips per day, which yields a headway of about 80 minutes, so an hour and 20 minutes. The first and last trip of the day would include a longer service that goes all the way to the transit center in Martinsburg, just because the operator has to get, from the garage to the route and back. But otherwise, during most of the day, it would be limited as far north as the VA Medical Center. There would be an opportunity to transfer there, but it would not be the same sort of time transfer guarantee that we're trying to achieve at the transit center. This would go down West Virginia 9, serve the Marketplace and Fairfax Crossing commercial developments, and then make its way down Fairfax Boulevard, sort of to the core of Ranson and Charlestown, and then terminate at the Walmart. The other major route that would serve Jefferson County is Route G. This is most similar to the existing Route 20, and this is sort of the major east-west connection from Harper's Ferry continuing down US 340. It would serve that Walmart, the same Walmart served by Route F, and then continue hitting a lot of the major destinations in Charlestown and Ranson before terminating around Apple Tree Apartments. Similar to Route F, this would also have 1 to 2 trips a day near the start and end of service that would go all the way to Martinsburg. But during the bulk of the day, the majority of the trips would be limited to the alignment that you're seeing on the screen now. This route is also slated to operate on Saturdays, so this would be the primary Saturday service seen in Jefferson County. It does serve the same Walmart that Route F does and has the same headway. So these two routes would sort of be scheduled together to kind of facilitate a time transfer at that Walmart. So that would kind of guarantee a more kind of cohesive network within Jefferson County. Okay, moving on to Berkeley County, because we know a lot of people sort of commute in between the counties. Route A would be the first of 2 major north-south routes. This would be the new extension going all the way to Spring Mills, serving the North Berkeley Library, the Walmart, and the 2 medical facilities just off of US 11. From there, it would head straight down, serve the existing train station, as well as the new multimodal facility that I've talked about, before going through the heart of downtown Martinsburg, and then hitting the Walmart before ending at the Target just off of the interstate, south of the city. We envision roughly 5 trips a day, which comes out to a bus every hour and a half, approximately. Its sister route, if you will, Route B, is kind of doing the southern connection, connecting Martinsburg down to Procter & Gamble and also some of the commercial developments in Inwood. There would be 2 what we call patterns to this route. Pattern 1 would be going the full length, while pattern 2 would provide additional what we call short trips to Development Drive North, which is serving Procter & Gamble. This service would operate roughly from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., with 5 trips doing the full alignment and additional 4 trips doing the partial alignment. And that was to make sure that we could provide more service on the denser part, which is everything from Procter & Gamble heading north, and also make sure we can have trips that are coordinated with shift times at Procter & Gamble facility. Route C, I realized this is most similar to the existing Route 18. Route C is sort of a combination between existing routes 12 and 19, and this connects Martinsburg with the large industrial complex at Caperton, as well as providing a new connection to Hedgesville that we don't have today. This would have another sort of 2 different patterns on it, where one pattern would only go as far as the Caperton Industrial Park, while additional service would go all the way to Hedgesville. And this is both trying to be efficient with a fixed resource system, as well as trying to acknowledge that the main road to Hedgesville at certain times of day with school releases sees a lot of traffic that would really impede the route's ability to stay on time. So roughly would operate from 5:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. With 6 trips a day on the shorter pattern and 5 trips a day on the longer pattern. Route D is sort of the successor to Route 10 of kind of providing that local Martinsburg circulation. This would be a counterclockwise loop around the core of Martinsburg. It would serve the Berkeley County Health Department, the Berkeley Medical Center, Shinda Community Health, make its way down to the new transit center, the train station, and then going through the older, more historic parts of the city, including Fountainhead Apartments, Ambrose Towers, and the Walmart. It would operate counterclockwise, and this would also be the primary service on Saturdays with a slight adjustment to provide more Saturday coverage. This would roughly operate from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. with 15 trips per day, which comes out to about hourly service. Route E provides this direct connection between Martinsburg and the VA. Like I mentioned with Route F in Jefferson County, these two routes would meet at the VA Medical Center to provide opportunities for transfer, but compared to the new transit center in Martinsburg and the Walmart in Charlestown, the actual transfer windows between these two would be a little, I think, looser, simply because they operate at different frequencies. So we estimate that this would be about 10 trips per day, roughly hourly service. So those are all the main routes that you would see on your average weekday. For Saturday service, there's really 2 routes that would operate, one in each county. So Route G, we already talked about. This route would have roughly the same alignments. The main difference between it would have a slightly different frequency, but we would think it would operate roughly from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And similar to weekday service, there would be limited trips connecting to Martinsburg at the start and the end of the day. Route D is, right now we're calling it a separate route, whether it's excuse me. I misspoke. This would be the weekend service in Martinsburg, very similar to the weekday service of this counterclockwise loop. The main difference being that it's also expanding north to capture a lot of this area that's served by Route A during a weekday. So how this service would work is it would do a loop from the transit center, covering a lot of the same stops as before, return to the transit center, and then do a second loop to cover this northern portion. So pattern 1 is the southern portion of the figure 8. That would be roughly 7 trips per day. Pattern 2 is a bit shorter, so that would be about 5 trips a day. So those are the recommendations one by one. And I totally acknowledge that, like, it's hard to kind of piece the network together looking at them one by one. So we built a couple of quick maps to kind of show a comparison of what the existing weekday network could look like versus the proposed weekday network. So this is when we zoom out at the full county level and really just kind of pay attention to those longer trips. So in the existing network, we see from Martinsburg, the 18 goes down to Inwood. The 11 meets the 16 at the VA Medical Center. 16 connects the medical center to Charlestown and Ranson, and then you have the 20. Compare this to the proposed network. Everything south of Martinsburg generally, looks very similar. No major change in the connections that are available. North of Martinsburg is where we see new service opportunities. We see this extension via Route C to Martins and Hedgesville, and we see this new connection to Spring Mills on Route A. So those are kind of one of the big selling points of the network, is that we've increased these longer connections. In the Charlestown-Ranson area, the existing network, we see Route 16 and 20 both coming in from the north. The 16, I believe, ends at Charles Towers, and then the 20 is sort of that east-west connection going out to Harper's Ferry. We've achieved a lot of that those same connections in spirit, but also tried to provide a bit more kind of circulation through Charlestown and Ranson as well. So overall, a little major increases in coverage, and a few places where we got rid of some turns but replaced them with others. But even I think in some of those cases, it's kind of in the most walkable parts of the town where the blocks are shorter. Then finally, looking at Martinsburg, the biggest thing to keep in mind with Martinsburg is right now we have the daytime routes in the existing network. You have your daytime routes and then your evening routes. So I think at first glance, you see more numbers here on the screen in the existing network on the left compared to the proposed on the right. And so it could be, whoa, there are less routes than there used to be. But because we tried to fold a lot of that evening service into the same route, so a route name doesn't just change depending on time of day, a lot of the service in terms of how late it operates and what areas have it is unchanged. It's just fewer numbers for people to remember. Other than that, we can still see a bit more connection opportunities heading north to Spring Mills, heading northwest to Hedgesville. And then we tried to simplify a bit in Martinsburg the routes, the areas that are served. Just again, something simpler for the public to understand and simpler for EPTA operationally as well. Okay, so what next? That was obviously a lot that I've thrown at you in the past 40 minutes. We have a open public forum. It's, I think, a much lower lift compared to the survey we sent out last year of people just being able, you can scan this QR code. We'll also have the link available on this slide, and I can drop it in this chat as well, of just 2 questions. If you're an existing EPTA rider or not, and your general feedback on the recommendations. This public forum will be open for roughly the next month from today until May 2nd, so a month exactly. And it will also have links to this PowerPoint as well as the recording. So for people who weren't able to attend tonight, you can point them to this form. They can click the link, watch the presentation, review the slides, whichever they prefer, and still be able to provide feedback. So where do we go from here? What are our next steps? So we're in the spring of 2025 right now. Roughly the entire month of April, we're dedicated to collecting public feedback. After that closes right at the start of May, we'll spend the next month kind of finalizing these service recommendations, looking at the feedback, seeing if there are items we can act on, items we can't, and adjusting the recommendations accordingly. June 2025 is when we'll do a final set of public meetings. These will most be similar, I think, to this presentation today, but more just these are the final recommendations to be adopted. That'll be presented, and then we'll go to EPTA's board for final review. After that, EPTA will spend sort of the rest of the year getting ready, developing the more precise timetables, and working out any last-minute operational details for implementation of spring 2026. The idea being that when the transit facility is open, that's really the big sort of push to launch all of these new routes kind of at once to coordinate with the transit center. So it'll be big kind of overnight change, if you will. So EPTA can focus on the operational as well as the marketing, letting riders know what's happening. So hopefully no one's caught off guard. Yeah, a few just sort of final notes I'll make, and then we'll open for any questions. We can go back to existing routes. We can talk more about the process. Service to Shepherdstown is still kind of under evaluation, dialogues between EPTA and the university. Like I mentioned, we have a hyperlink to the feedback form here that I can drop in the chat as well, and that will be open for the next month. And then after that closes on May 2nd, our team will go back, read all the comments, document them, so they will be, a summary of those comments will be available in the final TDP report, as well as any changes to the recommendations as a result. And thank you for your patience. That was 45 minutes of listening to me, so bravo. That's all I have. So we can spend the rest of this time fielding questions. We can jump back and look at specific routes, talk about process. Elaine and Matt are here as well to field any questions that I'm unable to answer. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Jared. Maybe before we get into questions, Jared, you had mentioned a little bit towards the beginning of the presentation about some of the survey results of folks that were interested in seeing the expansion of current transit infrastructure on the existing system. And I didn't know, Elaine, I can slide over here if you want to just maybe mention the bus stop signs and the shelters that are on the way.
So we have actually got the first 25. All our bus stop signs are in, but because we have not finalized the new TDP for moving into the new facility, we've gone ahead and gotten 25 stops done and are ready for to be put up around the two counties. So those are on, they're in process. And as we get closer, we'll be, doling out all the stops with all new wayfinding signage. I just placed a order for 10 bus shelters. They will be, they will have solar lighting in them, and they will have the capability to have information, system maps, or just general information within the shelter in, I guess, a display case. So we're really excited about those. Those are due the mid of June. So I know we're already talking to Boulevard about the shelter for their stop. And yeah, I'll be contacting a lot of people to put those shelters out.
Yep, that sounds great. And I do want to thank, I know that both Liz and Ken did provide direct feedback through the survey and through other public forums towards us. And we could maybe, Jared, pull back up the some of the maps that show the existing versus proposed. I think that might be the most helpful in guiding the conversation in Jefferson. Perfect. All righty. So.
Yeah, sure. I defer to you to go first.
Hey, this is Liz Ricketts, City of Charlestown council member, EPTA board member, MPO board member, lots of boards. So one thing that's come up since the last time that we met as a steering committee is the imminent closure of the Day Report Center here in Jefferson County. That is still an evolving situation, but that is a service that for many people is court mandated that they access. And without it being in Jefferson County, those people will have to go to Berkeley County to access those resources. So I know that the county commission had discussed this and mentioned the EPTA. So I don't know if that's going to be something that's more of a contracted service situation, or if it's something that we need to look at for frequency and hours of that Charlestown to Martinsburg kind of connection through the VA. So that was just some kind of breaking news that happened since we last met and kind of went over everything. So just wanted to know if that had come up at all. And
You want to come here? I'll go there. I can all have mine. There's plenty.
it's like our own podcast here.
So yes, I have talked to the Jefferson County. And so we are going to partner with them. We do offer this transportation that is grant funded for recovery and treatment services. So we're going to partner with them, get them on and be able to build a grant for transportation. And then we have bus passes. And we've talked about even, I did speak to Berkeley County a little bit, working with them. If we could swoop down and get a group of people at one time, we can get them up there so they're on time for their appointments. So I think at a high level, we kind of have a plan, at least EPTA does. Mm-hmm. We're waiting for really just Jefferson County, Berkeley County to do what they want. And then we'll swoop in and fill in where the need is. I know we did look because Jefferson County has bought the American Public University building, and that was discussed as part of this realignment. So we will be prepared for that as well. So.
Yeah, I don't have I don't really have a lot to say, except for I think that these adjustments do represent a good, a substantial improvement Especially, I particularly appreciate the little loop around the marketplace and the Fairfax crossing. I know we discussed that. But one thing I believe I noticed that was changed, I think in our previous discussions, we had some connection to Shenandoah Springs. It might have been F or G, I can't remember. But if you recall, I was talking about bringing it up Flowing Springs Road because I would like to start encouraging some connectivity on that northeast side of Route 9 there. Because we've got a tremendous amount of housing going in there, and we will also have a 31-acre nature park there. I just, that entire freeway right there from the intersection there of 340 to Route 9 going up is almost entirely going to become new city blocks. And I believe with Charlestown doing too on the southeast side of that too is being developed as well. So it's obviously this is a great beginning, and I know I voiced my support with you, Elaine, about wanting to even provide some financial support or whatever, because my ultimate goal is to see something along the lines of a Route D for Charlestown and Ransom, because even if you look here, Charles Towers is as far south as that goes. And I'd like to encourage or see some more connectivity from the residential areas on the outside where walkability just isn't feasible. And I think that it's obviously I don't have any data to back this up, but I think that you'd see ridership numbers start to increase if that circulator type of component did exist, because a lot of these routes operate in a linear fashion. So, for example, if I'm going from Charles Towers to Walmart, I got to go that direction. Again, this is an improvement from what we discussed, but I can't really visualize the timing. So if it's going to connect in a way where it's convenient for me to make a trip to Walmart, be there for an hour, and then be coming right back, but otherwise some of these routes kind of leaves you off the beaten path as far as trying to find your way back to your original destination. That's kind of where my goal is with the circular concept. But this is definitely an improvement from I believe from the existing network. So, and that I'm also interested in finding out too, I guess, a cost share or some improvement of these bus shelters and waypoints.
Okay.
So it could be an evolution of things. It could take a couple of years, and obviously money is going to determine a lot of that, but it's something I'm very anxious to push.
So I will say that if you provide the pad, we will put the shelter in. And if we're going to provide the post and the signage, if, you know, your public works department can put the signs in, it's part of their day.
Yeah.
So,
Well, fortunately, this TDP doesn't look like it'll be active until spring of next year. So, because obviously our public works is pretty busy taking this summer. So, but I think that would be reasonable. I think we could utilize a lot of our easements and things for pad sites. And I think some of these proposed stops represent a good opportunity for potential bus stop additions. I think that would make a big difference in the world, because you know, the 2030 census is still a way out, but I could very easily see a scenario where Branson and Charlestown is starting to hit maybe a class 2 city soon. So, yep, that's all the thoughts I have right now. But that was the other thing though, too, is that the main thing that stood out for me, because I made that comment about there, I believe, a connection to Shenandoah Springs. Yeah. I don't think it would be, personally, the biggest roadblock here would be the railroad tracks. It doesn't come by frequent enough for me to envision it being a very substantial roadblock, so to say. But it would bring that connectivity up into the Walnut Grove and some of the county areas up into Briar Run and President's Point and some of Ransom Heights. But Walnut Grove is one, it's not in city limits, but I do see a lot of pedestrian traffic coming through there. I think that you would end up catching some people if you came through the residential side, as opposed to that route up Route 9 is much more time efficient. But if you actually looked at the time difference, I think you'd be looking at maybe a 2 or 3 minute variation, because there's not a lot of stops along that route.
And with the increase, riders from
Exactly, because yeah, that strip right there is fat, it's definitely efficient, but you're not getting anybody on that bus right there.
Correct.
So,
Yeah.
those are just my thoughts, so.
And we did look at that segment that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Sort of the, one, we're staying in at least for now, in a cost neutral scenario. And the other major thing is when we increase the run times of routes, we have to, if it goes too long, you have to make it less frequent. And we thought sort of the priority here is by maintaining both of these routes at that 80-minute frequency, that's how you kind of guarantee a more efficient transfer at the Walmart, because they both are designed, they can both be timed to meet there around the same point, lay over together, and then pulse out. So when you start adding runtime to one of them to where it no longer can meet that 80-minute timing, then they fall out of sync and it's really hard. And so unless you slow, I think, both of them down frequency wise, they kind of lose their sync. And then when we looked at the data too, I know you said those areas are growing, but we sort of had to, I think, kind of prioritize on areas we may get more dense versus kind of areas where we saw existing density and support. So I do think a longer term growth idea, those are definitely, I think, priority areas, but kind of working with the existing resources we have and also making sure that operationally the routes can sync up properly is why we held off.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Now, just out of curiosity, what was the time differential when you looked at that?
I would have to consult my notes. I don't know it off the top of my head.
Okay.
Would it be possible to go to where we're just looking at F and G separately?
Yes. So yeah, if I recall, the F was really tight on time. So even a minor difference caused was enough to kind of push it out of that ability to meet an 80-minute frequency. We're kind of, that's the route's kind of maxed out, which from an operational perspective is all right, you're really kind of, you don't want too much kind of layover dead time, right? I think also we looked at the turns too of just serving Fairfax Crossing and Marketplace after making, kind of going in, serving one than the other. It made more sense to I believe we looked at both directions of, okay, if it's coming southbound, doing Marketplace, then crossing versus doing crossing the Marketplace. And from just a bus turning perspective where the existing stops were, going 1-2 just seemed safer and more operationally feasible. And at that point, we were already on Fairfax Boulevard, where we also saw a bit more existing density and development. So it kind of seemed serving, I guess, a bit more of a, from the data perspective, reliable market compared to the newer developments on the east side of the highway.
Yeah.
And
what about this one? I'm sorry, what about G?
G is, I think both of these were, I'll have to double check, but I'm pretty sure both of these were kind of maxed out in terms of the runtime compared to the frequency, which makes just makes them very sensitive to anything that would slow them down. I think it was also sort of another case of if we deviated to serve this area, sort of northeast off of that new development, I'm blanking on the name, excuse me, it kind of would necessitate adding a lot of probably only one direction service in the more denser historic parts of Charlestown and Ranson, which again, just looking at which area had more kind of demographic indicators, it kind of seemed like we didn't want to sacrifice kind of the quality of service in areas that existing have service and have the demographics for something that's a bit more unproven, at least in a cost neutral scenario. I think if there were additional resources.
Yeah, it makes total sense to strengthen a foundation before you build out. But I just, I'm going to.
that could be in that maybe the out year or the late year, the TDP is picking that up as these neighborhoods come online and some of the street connections get stronger and completely built out, and the Flowing Springs Park is fully realized, right, with the trail and everything that's going to happen there. Maybe that's more appropriate as so we've got, so this is we're going to the first year of the TDP, but most of the changes won't happen until year 2. So maybe it's just the later half that those types of connections are evaluated based on the growth that's on the ground then.
So, and yeah, that was going to be another question of mine, is that assuming I was able to come up with a proposal or we were able to come up with a feasibility or cost, would that still be able to be developed outside of this TDP?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. Excellent.
And I think we could also put something in like Matt was saying. Most of the TDP is designed to be phased in at once, but that's not a requirement. So we can always have longer term recommendations and have this sort of third hypothetical Charlestown Ransom circular type service that we could say is year 5, or we could, not commit to that, because, but we can have something documented, I suppose.
Even if it was year 5, it could be pulled forward. I think a third route and making the frequency shorter, because that's one of the things that I'm challenged with on these, is that some of our frequencies have gotten longer, and we all know that the higher the frequency, the better the ridership. So, I mean, if we could get a third route down here to kind of take some of that away and make the frequency much higher,
Yeah,
that would make things a lot better.
absolutely. I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, because the routes that you all have chosen are absolutely the most important routes, but I think that just weaving another one in there just creates just a better connectivity overall. So I will defer now to Ms. Ricketts, who I think had a thought. And thank you for addressing this thought.
Yeah, so just a thought and question here on Route G, and without having, the ridership numbers in front of us, obviously 80-minute headway, a lot of that is taken up in the travel to Bolivar and Harper's Ferry. And so my question would be, is fewer full trip route something that we could consider? Maybe that bus doesn't go out to Harper's Ferry on every trip, but is just more synced up with the MARC train schedule, or ridership numbers that exist currently. I wouldn't want to cut service out from people that utilize it, but if fewer trips could go all the way and then it become more circular, that's just another consideration.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be something similar to what we're doing with or proposing with Hedgesville then, right?
Right.
Where it's,
Yeah.
Yeah, we could look into that, see how that shakes out. It's hard to know exactly until we actually look into timing, but on first glance, it sounds like a reasonable thing we could look at, and also just looking at the Harper's Ferry ridership numbers to make sure we're not, it's long, but if the ridership is short, yeah. So it's a good idea. We'll look into it. That was a long-winded way of saying that.
Thank you.
well, and you should share, Elaine, too, that 2024 has the highest historic ridership in EPTA in 49 years, right? So you've rebounded beyond prior to COVID, and expanded beyond that. So it's like 283,000?
265.
265. I should have gone much lower. Then you get
Still higher.
So the word's getting out, right, and people, this is going to help even build on the success that's happened so far. Oh, yep.
So I'm very excited about the tourism potential for the Saturday service. I think we're going to see that really pay off between Harper's Ferry and Charlestown, and Ranson, just really circulating people that are already here for our wonderful historic and shopping and all those opportunities that people come to visit. So I'm really excited to see that, and I think we'll see ridership increase just from that opportunity.
It's been a long time coming.
Yeah.
I guess then we'll open it up to if anybody online, Jenny or Dave, if anybody has any comments that you all would like to make, please feel free to, or any questions.
Yeah, I was just going to bring up the Day Report Center, but Elizabeth did a good job of explaining that, and it sounds like you're already addressing it. The idea of going up Flowing Springs Road is we definitely need to make a plan in the future for that, because there's so much happening along there. And coming back, they could come back in to Fairfax Crossing, right? They could somehow loop that.
Yeah, I think to make it, for having something implementable immediate term, we had to, limit ourselves to, okay, what's the roadway conditions? Is that turn possible? If we have a route that we sort of have acknowledged, like this is a bit longer term, this is year 5 or whatever, and maybe it operates on the assumption that, oh, I mean, this is often more of a case in denser areas, but just like a parking space is operationally problematic. When it's longer term, we can say, all right, work with the respective jurisdiction of allowing a left turn or something like that. So designing a route with that in mind, that it's not part of the immediate implementation, gives a little more flexibility in what we propose.
Yeah, by that time, there will be there's some projects, highway projects along the Flowing Springs route that will be coming online that would help improve safety and operations too. So the Flowing Springs Road exit off of Route 9 West now is going to have an acceleration lane. We are heading westbound. It's also going to have high mast lighting for nighttime. And then right when you get off, so where Flowing Springs they call it Connector Road, meets with Flowing Springs, meets with Shenandoah Springs, that intersection, that's getting upgraded to a traffic signal that has some turn lanes. So it won't be necessarily a four-way stop, a kind of open-ended four-way stop where like if you're in the turn lane, you get there before somebody else, you go. And so that can cause some confusion as to the right of way and the turning movements. But all that's going to be coming online in the next year or so as well. Okay, great. All righty, cool. If there's no other questions or comments, then I just want to thank everybody for coming out this evening. So our website is HEPMPO.com. If you go there, you should be able to download a PDF of tonight's presentation. We're going to get the survey up there as well, which will be open through May 2nd. Again, we'll be at Martinsburg tomorrow evening. And then, yeah, once we're able to get tonight's presentation fully processed, we're going to have that up on our YouTube channel, and we'll have links to that on our website as well for folks who weren't able to attend. So if there's nothing else, again, thank you everyone for coming out. Thank you, Jared and Chris. Great job. And yeah, have a safe trip home, and we'll talk again soon. All right, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And I did drop the link to the survey in the chat for anyone who's online now, if you want to leave your comment while it's all fresh. Yeah, thanks.
Perfect. All right. Thanks. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.